Hi you guys, welcome back to my channel. It's not actually autumn right now, this is just my favorite cup. And honestly, it's the time of day where I need a little bit more caffeine and yes, I do have cheap Keurig in here with just some almond milk creamer. That's kind of like my go-to coffee, I guess you could say. Okay, let's address a few things first. Number one, I'm using a temporary camera. This looks weird. I hope you guys can hear me and see me okay. But like I say in all my videos, I am not a professional YouTuber. I am so sorry. I am a cosplayer. I'm a creator. I like to go to conventions. I like to make costumes. I like to wear them. I like to paint. I like to draw. But doing technology, especially video and audio recording, is a whole new world to me, and I feel like such a little baby in such a huge sea of professionals. But the good news about this is that I'm not sponsored, so when I talk about opinion stuff, I'm being quite blunt and honest and real with you guys. Unlike other people who are paid to have opinions, my opinion really comes out of my head, very unfiltered. So I hope you guys appreciate that. So with today's video, we are going to celebrate the end of this horrible, horrible year. 2022 has been like one of the worst years in a very long time for me. I have been highly stressed. If I don't come out of this year with, a handful more of white hairs, I'll be very surprised. So in order to celebrate the end of the year, there has been a video that I've been saving to do for a long time. And we're gonna throw it in with the controversial cosplay opinions because this one is, this is gonna be kind of wild to talk about. So yes, if you want to know how my year has been, please watch my last video where I talk about every single bad luck thing that happened to me, which just happened over and over and over. And let's go ahead and talk about today's subject, which is going to be the early to mid 2000s and how insane it was to be an anime fan in this culture during this time. So first off, I want to address, when I'm saying like anime fan, what I really mean is anyone who is into anime, manga, video games, or Japanese subculture in general. And most of us kind of fell like somewhere in all four things. So I'm just gonna kind of address everyone as a whole. But even if you weren't super into anime at this time, a lot of this stuff might apply to you. So maybe listen, you never know. So in the year 2000, the Millennium, did anyone watch Xenon, the Disney movie, and think that is what the future was holding? We were gonna live in spaceships. We were gonna have shiny silver clothing, crazy hairstyles, and cool, not even international, but intergalactic pop stars that we would be following. And there is a very, very bright outlook on the future because of how insane technology had become, like how much it went from 0 to 100 so fast. And it's kind of cool because I remember being a kid. I mean, I remember 1999 and Y2K and everyone partying, but also being like super nervous because they weren't sure what was gonna happen. So while the parents were having a huge New Year's Eve party, they also had a ton of like survival gear in the basement, and they were like, haha, maybe all the computers will fail. Like, let's see what'll happen. So it was a very wacky time to be alive. So specifically, the time period I'm going to be talking about today is the year 2000 to 2008. And in this period of my life, I was 8 years old, all the way going up until I was 16, and I really got introduced to cosplay and conventions and things like that. So in my early years, at 8 years old, I was so much into Sailor Moon. I was an insane Sailor Moon fan. I would go to the library. Oh my gosh, this is like so embarrassing, but I remember I would go to the public library. I was really, really poor. So me and my friend would go there, and you were allowed to print 100 pages for free if you had a library card. And every month we would go there and we'd each print out 100 pages of Sailor Moon pictures, screenshots, fan art, paper dolls, like anything that we could get our hands on. And we actually had a huge binder where we would keep like all the pictures of Sailor Moon stuff, and I would go over to my friend's house and we'd like open them up and we would literally trade them back and forth like Pokemon cards. I remember printing out pictures of like the male characters and we would like kiss them. That sounds so insane to say out loud, but it was a very, very different time. So not only did I like Sailor Moon, I really, really loved Digimon and Tokyo Mew Mew. Just kind of like a lot of mainstream stuff that was made for like pretty much little girls and was on American TV. And where I lived, on the outskirts of Seattle, in the suburbs in a small town, not many people even really knew what anime was. In 5th grade, we did the talent show, and we sang The Power of Love from the Sailor Moon movie, and we actually wore schoolgirl skirts and white polo shirts, and we made bows that we like pinned onto our shirts and our backs to look like the Sailor Scouts. And I thought it was so cool. I felt so awesome doing it, but no one in our school knew who we were, what the song was from, what we were even doing. And looking back, I just cringed so hard because me and my best friend were so excited and so happy to do this. And then everyone was like, okay, like at the end. So, yeah, such a different time. However, I will say most of us have very rose-tinted glasses when it comes to like our introduction into the anime subculture. And I will say, what I remember versus what was actually going on is quite different. So when I decided to do this topic, I decided to really deep dive and think about what were some of the crazier things that was going on in our subculture that no one seems to talk about. So I've broken it down kind of into 3 portions, and I'm just gonna warn you guys, we are gonna be opening up some deep, dark memories you may have. So please get your drink and snack, sit back and relax and just listen, because man, this is probably gonna bring up some wild memories for you. So first off, let's talk about what it was like to be someone who liked anime during this time period. In the early 2000s, where I lived, and most places around me, if you liked anime, it was seen as weird, cringy, and just immature, which is such a different universe than it is now. I mean, anime is so mainstream these days. Japanese subculture is so mainstream. I mean, you have like Sanrio, you have a lot of different animes and mangas. I mean, you can go into a Hot Topic and buy a ton of merchandise for any of your friends who are into anime right now. That was not an option in the early 2000s. And in fact, if you did want to buy something, you had to pay a pretty big premium and you had to know where to go, or you had to do something even scarier and put your credit card information or your parents' credit card information in online and hope that something actually came in the mail. So when you have a subculture that people bully you for relentlessly if they find out, you typically do not bring it up in normal conversations. So where do you go to talk to your fellow fans about what you're into? You go to the Wild West, known as early 2000s internet. We had Angel Fire, we had MSN, AOL, Yahoo Messengers. It was just such a wild time. There were so many independent blogs, independent websites. The cool thing about this time period was people weren't like sponsored or paid to do any of this stuff. All of this was done out of the love in people's hearts for the content that they were absorbing. So if you went to someone's, tiny website that they had hand-coded themselves, like they weren't being paid to do that. They were doing it because they were a huge fan of the website and they wanted to connect with others. I remember going on people's like blog fan sites and always leaving comments, and like every single day I check into the same ones just to see if anyone had recently commented or updated or whatever else. And that was like a way to get a social interaction. So most of us though would go to the chat rooms, because in these chat rooms there were what we would call like open public rooms where people would have a theme to the room, and it was just open domain. Like you could go in there, you could log in to your MSN Messenger, you could go to all the open room lists and just scroll through and find any open room that you wanted to go into and then just hang out with people. In fact, I think I had like 3 rooms that were in my favorites list, and I would go into them every single day after school. You heard the little door like opening, and that meant you were logging in or one of your friends was logging in. You had your username, you had your little away message, so if someone was creeping on you, you can put yourself to away really fast so they'd leave you alone. And it was just, it's kind of crazy to think about it. So I'm going to talk about some of this stuff that is definitely from a different time. So first off, I can't go through this video without talking about it, so I'm just going to throw it out in the open. Predators. Predators were such a crazy open thing back then. You watched To Catch Predator with Chris Hansen. All of that is completely real. If you were not around during this time period and you've watched that show and thought, oh, they just threw all that stuff in for like drama, no, that is like 100% real. It was very, very common to go into any open group, and the second that someone found out that you were either underage or a female, it was like you would get so many private messages from creepy people that you would eventually have to log out and sometimes even change your login or username just so they wouldn't know it's you again. I had to do that multiple times because of creepy adult men trying to private message me. The other thing that happened a lot of times was catfishing, where you would go into an open chat where everyone was supposed to be under 16 or supposed to be 13 or under, who was just, into anime or something. And you would exchange emails with someone on there who you thought was another 13-year-old female that also liked Sailor Moon, only to find out months later they were not. They were definitely an adult male because they were catfishing you or something kind of similar. Also, people who were just lying about their age, people who were lying about where they were from, people who were lying about how they looked. Really, you could go online and be anyone you wanted, which is kind of the case now, except I'm going to bring this up in the next subject. Your social media presence, which is like a real thing now. So the other thing that happened a lot was a lot of secret online dating. And the crazy thing about this is that every single person that I knew that I was close to in the early 2000s, up until we were probably like 16, had an online boyfriend or significant other at some point, at least one. Every single person I knew. It was so common to meet someone online, have a connection with them because they shared the same interests, exchange emails or phone numbers so that you could text or call them, but never actually see what they looked like. So you had to completely trust whatever they told you was real, which is so different because, like I said, people nowadays have presence online. They have usernames and emails that are linked. They have LinkedIn, they have Facebook. It used to be some people would have MySpace. But if you research someone online now, you're gonna find out that they're a real person and probably find pictures of them. And if you don't, you'll kind of know right away that they're probably lying. Like if you can't find someone anywhere online, that's usually an indicator they've given you a fake name. Back then, it was like you just had to have 100% trust and hope that whoever you were secretly online dating was actually who they said they are. So yeah, it's just such a different place. I mean, most of these chat rooms were also very unmoderated, so people could say or do whatever they wanted, and a lot of the behavior was just like completely unacceptable nowadays. Okay, let's talk about the other part of not having people understand what anime or manga or Japanese subculture actually was. The problem is, when it's such an unknown thing, it's such a tiny subculture or just a not well-known subculture. When your family or friends are trying to be supportive, it turns into many, many situations that are just so confusing, cringy, and embarrassing because they're trying so hard, but they really have no clue what they're doing. So we had a lot of birthday parties for friends where their parents were so kind and loving and caring. But I remember this one birthday party where my best friend, her parents knew we were very much into anime, and so they had gone to like a record store or CD store in town and they had found a bunch of anime DVDs, so they bought them for her. However, these were all mature content. This was not anime. This was definitely mature content. Definitely not for our age group. And it was so embarrassing because everyone that saw her open the gifts knew exactly what it was as soon as they saw them. But you can't say anything to your parents, so you're just like, wow, great, thanks. And it's just so embarrassing. Not only that, a lot of times for Christmas or birthdays, I would get like random how to draw anime books, even if they were definitely not good ones. And even worse, random Japanese items. Things that I had no clue what they were, what I was supposed to do with them. I understand people, like, they were like, oh, she likes the anime thing, and the anime thing's Japanese, so yeah, get her some chopsticks and these random Japanese fans we found at the grocery store. So for a long, long time, I was getting all these gifts that I was trying to be very appreciative for, but again, it was like no one really understood the subculture, and they had no clue what was really going on, and so yeah, it just turned into a huge mess of people trying to be supportive in just really, really cringy ways. So let's talk about the next part of being a fan during the early 2000s. Now, this is something I think a lot of people nowadays take for granted. So if you're an anime fan right now, you are so lucky. I am so lucky. I am really happy that this has changed. In the early to mid 2000s, there were a lot less subgroups of our subculture. Even though it was a subculture, there's usually like, okay, you like Japanese subculture of some sort. Anime, manga, video games, cosplay, whatever. You fall somewhere in there. From there, we have subgroups of each of those things. And then from there, there's subgroups of those things and subgroups of those things. So like, no matter what kind of style you have, no matter where you live, no matter what age group you're in, nowadays there is a group somewhere that you can find that you can connect with. In the early 2000s, that was definitely not the case. There were many less subgroups than there are now. And because of that, most anime and Japanese media was extremely mixed. So where you could find it was a huge, huge mix of like everything. And I spent so much time wading through manga online where people had like scanned and uploaded pages, trying to download episodes of things, trying to look up things to find the correct reference that was actually in English that I could read. So you had to do a lot of work to become a fan. Because of this, most fans kind of stayed within the genre that they first got into. So for me, I was very much into Sailor Moon, which meant that I kind of stayed within that like magical girl subgroup, because anyone else that I met who was into magical girls, that's all they wanted to talk about. They didn't want to know that I sometimes watched Zoids, or I sometimes watched Tenchi Muyo, or I sometimes watched anything that was kind of more like a shonen or action-y type anime, because they weren't into it. So I kind of tamped down on the other interests I had and just stayed more in my lane, more with that subgroup. The problem with being a part of a subgroup like that is that you're expected to like the same things as everyone else. So every time someone had told me about a Sailor Moon movie, it was expected I had to go watch it. I had to know all the lore of Sailor Moon if I wanted to fit in. People were a lot less accepting of you saying that you were a fan of anime, but you hadn't actually seen a lot of anime. So a lot of fans just kind of felt like we had to actually live up to being a fan, where nowadays you could watch like a single show and say, oh, I'm a huge fan of My Hero Academia, so I love anime. Back then, if you had said that, people would be like, you don't like anime, you just like that one show. They were very more kind of mean about it and a little bit gatekeeping than they are now. The other part of this, which is probably the worst part, is, oh my god, searching for things online was so freaking dangerous. You couldn't send links to people. You couldn't send, online URLs of things, because you never really knew what was going to show up on the website that day. Newgrounds was a great example of this, because Newgrounds had a lot of like really fun like anime dress-up games and things like that, but they also had a ton of mature content and mature games that like were straight up, I can't even say the word on here, but you guys know what I'm talking about. So if you found a really cool anime game or a funny anime video on Newgrounds and you went to send it to a friend, you had no clue what was going to pop up into the bar next to it, or if you sent them to the homepage, like what your friend might be searching for on that website. And a lot of times I knew so many kids who got into trouble with their parents because their parents were like, oh, what website are you on? Because they were just watching some innocent Newgrounds video, or they were innocently scrolling through pictures and fan art on DeviantArt. And when they show them the website, or the parents went to view the website later on their own, they were like, oh my god, and they would see all this mature stuff, and then instantly that friend was banned from watching anime at all or reading manga because their parents didn't understand it and everything was mixed. So there wasn't like, bumpers, like kiddie bumpers on the websites. It was like an all or nothing sort of thing, which is why a lot of us got very, very street smart and learned to not click on random links or pop-ups or anything, because viruses were very much real back then. I destroyed my family computer, definitely by downloading crap on LimeWire I probably shouldn't have been. And I think back and I think about just how different, like it was just so different back then. Nowadays, if you send someone a link, there might be some websites that are like, I don't know if this is great. Like if this person goes searching around on this website, they might find stuff and I don't really want them to associate me with that sort of stuff. But yeah, back then it was a real issue. Okay, now that we're pretty much 20 minutes in, let's talk about conventions. And first off, I want to say I went to my first convention in like 2006, 2007. This past year has actually been my 15th anniversary of going to conventions. So conventions have changed. Oh my gosh. I'm going to do an entire video where I talk about every single way that cosplay conventions have changed from the first time I went to one to all the way up till this year. That's a whole nother rodeo to go through. Specifically, I'm going to talk about what a convention was like when I was 16 years old in 2008. So like mid 2000s still, peak, crazy time. Oh my gosh, like a lot of behavior that is definitely not acceptable nowadays. First off, just gonna say it, conventions were really a cesspool. We would go, we would love to dress up, we'd have fun. It was so cool to interact with people there. But in the mid 2000s, there were so many creepy, strange people that went to conventions, and there were not really enough rules in place to protect the convention goers, which turned into really awkward and extreme interactions. I have heard many people talk about stories where they had a really bad interaction with a stranger at a convention, and I'm pretty sure most of these stories are from the mid 2000s, like, you know, around 2005 to 2010, like that time period, and I completely believe it. First off, we had a lot of creepy older guys approaching young girls who, you know, were obviously underage. The first time we went to SoccerCon, my best friend, who was literally 4 feet tall at the time, you know, we were like 15 years old, but she was very, very tiny and very short, very cute. A clearly 30-year-old man approached her, trying to hit on her, and no one said anything or did anything around her. Nowadays, if that were to happen, someone would be like, oh, hell no, and someone would step in and stop it, because people know to look out for that stuff. Back then, we thought it was funny. We thought it was a joke, and we were just like, oh, that guy's such a creep, what a weirdo, ha ha ha, and like made fun of him for literally years after that. But thinking back now, I'm 30 years old, and thinking back to when I was 15, if I saw a 15-year-old girl, tiny, small, obviously underage, being approached by a full adult man, I would be like, what are you doing there, buddy? Because that's not okay. And I know most people that run in these social circles now know to kind of look out for people who might be in trouble. The other part of conventions were, I don't even know what you would call this exactly, but like the glomp circles, the random hug signs, the people who would randomly come up and they were a little aggressive, I guess, in like what they were doing, or really, really wild and loud and kind of out of control. So a lot of people got hurt in the glomp circles. And I think this is like, people talk about glomp circles as, oh, it was so fun and I made friends and it was like kind of crazy and like we had a great time. But I saw a lot of people who either fell and got really hurt on pavement, or got like line backed by someone who was way too tall or big to be running at them and jumping on them, or had really strange interactions in a glomp circle where they were like, dude, not okay, don't do that. So it was kind of, I don't really know the description, but it was like, there's a reason why glomp circles and free hug signs aren't a thing anymore. The random hug signs, I don't really think hurt anyone necessarily, but there were a lot of underage kids that were doing them and a lot of older adults who were taking advantage of that. So I can understand, like, there's probably some consent laws around that get really blurry, and that's probably why they banned them. The other part of conventions were that there was really no personal space bubbles. Cosplay is not consent was not a thing back then. It was not talked about, it was not enforced. There were many, many times at a convention where someone brushed up against me in an inappropriate way, or went to go in and take a picture with me and put their arm around me without asking me, or rubbed my arm, or tried to hold my hand. Like, they just did things that were really strange. And back then, again, we kind of considered it to be funny and like a joke, but I think back and I think I wish I had had a voice or a platform to like tell people no. The fact that cosplay is not consent is like like a national message now. It makes it easier not only to stand up for yourself, but for other people to call it out, because it's an actual rule that's enforced at conventions, so people know to look for it. The last part of conventions is something that's it's funny and it's kind of sad at the same time, which is the random people who were just randomly crashing in hotel rooms, hotel lobbies, convention center floors. I remember people being so into anime and the subculture that even if they had absolutely no money at all, they would find a way to buy a badge and make it to a convention center, no matter what they had to do. We had friends who would stuff into a hotel room and have like 8 people with them, which again, you were definitely not allowed to do even back then, but it was seen as much more acceptable. There was people that would create groups online where they would just have random strangers staying in their rooms because, again, no one could really afford to go, and they were like, okay, everyone throw down $30 for the weekend and you can sleep on the floor or in the bathroom. People were very, very devoted to their fandoms, to cosplay, to convention life in general, that they were willing to sacrifice their comfort and their safety in order to get to a convention. I see so much less of this now than I used to. Like, this was a normal thing that happened every year, where you might be walking back from the rave at 2 a.m. and see groups of people huddled in convention corners with blankets because they couldn't afford a hotel room, and no one would kick them out. Same with hotel lobbies. We stayed at the Sheraton many years, and a lot of times there were random groups of people that would just like fall asleep on the couches, I guess like out in the main open shared common areas, or even sometimes like in hotel hallways where they were kind of like hidden, so maybe like staff couldn't see them. It was definitely not enforced, like you need to not be sleeping overnight in a strange area because that's not safe and that's strange and we don't really know what's going on. So yeah, just a lot of people doing whatever it took to get to the convention. That was so much more common. So anyways, this is where I'm going to end today's video before I go on too much longer. But as you guys can see, the early 2000s was a crazy Wild West time, and although I do have good memories of it, I think more of them in like learning terms. Like, I learned a lot from this time period. I got very street smart from this time period. I think it made me a better person overall, but looking back, I cannot believe that I made it through in one piece and that I still like anime and manga even after some of the interactions I have had, like online, in person, at a convention, with people who aren't into it. I mean, most of us were bullied pretty heavily in our younger years for even liking it, so if you could make it through that period, I really feel like you could make it through anything. So, as we go into the new year, all I can wish you guys is the best luck, the best good wishes, the most positive energy. I hope that this next year is going to be the best one that you guys have had. I hope it gets so much better than what we have had currently. So anyways, stick around guys for more videos. I will talk to you soon. Have a good day, have a good night, and I will see you next time. Bye.